The 12th century proved to be a turning point for arms and armour for knights in the Middle Ages. Previously, the Normans had defeated the Saxons at the Battle of Hastings, and went on to conquer England, dividing it up between the various warriors and noblemen who assisted William the Conqueror in the campaign of 1066. Now that these cutthroat warriors were responsible for lands in England, they began to become more domesticated, and many took their roles very seriously as a member of the gentry. By the late 1100s, we see some notable changes in how these knights armed themselves, and how the armour continued to steadily evolve. One of the main new features we see are the invention of mail chaussers. Mail chaussers, or chausses, did exist during the 11th century, notably right at the end of the 1000s, but they don't appear to fully enclose around the leg until the 12th and 13th centuries. These are essentially long socks, or hose, made of small metal rings, usually 6 mm in diameter, and require an expert level of craftsmanship to tailor the mail around the various shapes of the foot, leg, as well as the muscles and joints. There are many things to consider when making mail chaussers, and the end product needs to be tight to the body in order to work effectively. We don't know exactly how they closed the mail around the bottom of the feet, so there have been multiple methods in an attempt to recreate what we think they did. In this example, the mail is tightened underneath the foot with the use of multiple laces using a corseting method. Then the gap on the inside of the leg is also laced up to keep everything tight to the skin. In some depictions, we see turn shoes worn underneath the mail, and in rarer circumstances, the shoes can be seen worn over the mail. Tough leather soles are also sometimes stitched onto the bottom of the hose to provide a level of padding for the wearer. This mail is blackened, which is achieved by simply not polishing the metal rings after forging. Another method of blackening armour is heating the metal surface, then applying boiled linseed oil onto the metal, burning it into the armour's surface. Polishing mail was relatively simple in the medieval period. They would place the rings in a tumbler with sand and then spin the tumbler. The friction of the sand would rub off the blackened forge finish and polish the rings. Alternatively, a steel brush could also be used, but this takes much longer. Lacing up the mail chaussers takes quite a long time in comparison to wearing the rest of the armour. This is because the chaussers have to be worn and tightened just right, or else they won't function correctly. So a lot of attention is required to ensure a comfortable and tight fit. The mail chaussers feature gussets around the knee, so they are designed to sag a little bit with extra material around the kneecap when the leg is straight. The mail chaussers feature gussets around the knee, so that they are designed to sag a little bit with extra material around the kneecap when the leg is straight. So when the leg bends, the knee fills this gap and keeps a tight fit while allowing a high level of unrestricted mobility. Finally, the chaussers are laced to the lendenier. This is a wide belt of durable fabric, with lacing points to suspend the chaussers. Although during this period in history we don't know exactly what they called this item, as the word lendenier comes much later in the Middle Ages, we do sometimes read of 12th and 13th century scribes referring to a double belt, which could be a lendenier that we see here today. Lendeniers continued to be in use right up until the 15th century, but were gradually being phased out and replaced by the arming doublet, which allowed most of the full harness of plate armour to be laced to it. Next, an under-tunic is worn, which is made of a dense woolen weave. This was designed to be a durable underlayer for when the mail is worn on top. These tunics have been used underneath mail for many centuries, but weren't as thick as gambesons because the extra padding was simply not required. Indeed, there is no evidence for gambesons in the 12th century. Before the mail, the knight wears an arming cap and tucks his hair inside this cap. Now the mail hauberk is worn, which consists of integrated mail mittens and a coif. Just like the chaussers, these hauberks needed to be highly tailored and required an expert level of craftsmanship. The arms were especially difficult to make, as they tapered towards the wrist and, unlike the Chaucers, they were not laced up. They often did not have laces to tighten them up. Instead, they had to fully enclose the arms and provide a tight yet flexible fit, again with the use of gussets on the elbows. The male mittens have leather pads for the insides of the hands, and often had gaps so that the bare palm of the hand would hold the sword to give the best dexterity possible. The integrated coif also features a ventail or face mask, which wraps around the chin and neck, then hooks around the side of the head. Both hooks and laces were used in the 12th and 13th centuries as far as we know, in order to keep the mail closely fitted to the head. Again, we also don't know exactly how this was achieved. The contemporary artwork shows a variety of patterns of how the mail is worn on the head, which suggests that either multiple construction and fitting methods were used, or simply that this is just a degree of artistic license. Interestingly, perhaps by design or not, the hauberk overlaps the Chaucers on the thighs, which provides a double layer of protection. Now that the mail is on, the Chevalier now wears a surcoat over his armour, which is made of silk. Despite popular belief, these surcoats were not made of wool or linen, but they seem to be almost exclusively made of silk. Silk was a luxurious and highly priced commodity during the medieval period, specifically during the High Middle Ages, which encompasses the 12th and 13th centuries. Silk is also surprisingly tough, which may be one of the reasons why knights chose this material for their surcoats. Another very likely reason, other than the durability and the luxury, is that silk could have a very shiny finish, and therefore make the knight easily seen on the battlefield, which could then in turn intimidate an opponent, since striking colours, expensive clothing and fine armour would surely mean that this knight is very successful at his duty of combat. After the surcoat, the Chevalier wears a thin belt, which could be made out of either leather with gilded or brass decorative buckles and strap ends, or patterned colourful fabric. Then he wears his arming belt, which contains his sword. This is a reconstruction of an original medieval sword found just off the coast of Israel near Carmel Beach, and is believed to have been used during the Crusades between the late 11th to 13th centuries. During the High Middle Ages, swords such as these were highly important both for their martial effectiveness and their symbolism. It is said that only a knight may carry his sword on his belt in public, so it was seen as a sign of status, not to mention how expensive an item like this would have been in the medieval period. The Chevalier now wears his helmet. This is likely a helmet reserved for use on horseback only, as it has a flat top. There were a number of rounded helmet types which existed throughout this time, such as the conical nasal helm. But if a knight was on horseback, then his elevated position would mean that receiving strikes from above would be quite unlikely. The helmet itself is quite interesting, as it features an additional curved metal plate which protects the face, making glancing hits from a sword more difficult to actually strike the face. This relatively simple addition would eventually evolve to become the famous Great Helm, which would fully enclose the head. This helmet is a reconstruction of one found on the 12th century effigy of Geoffrey de Mandeville at Temple Church in London. Some people may refer to this as a transitional helmet, but it is important to note that medieval arms and armour was constantly evolving, so each item, whether it be a sword, shield or helmet, would transition into something slightly new and different with each generation. To this Chevalier, he would not consider this helmet to be transitional. Instead, this would just be the latest and most modern design in head protection that was available to him at the time. Finally, the knight equips his shield and spear. The shield has evolved slightly from the previous centuries, and now features a flat top as opposed to the rounded kite shields of the 11th century, which were themselves an evolution from the round shields of the previous periods in history. As mail armour and helmets began to successfully protect the majority of the body, shields were gradually beginning to shrink in size, and in the 13th century, we begin to see the famous heater shields, which are the smaller triangular shields which are often adorned in fabulous heraldry. This shield features an artistic stylized cross with beautiful azurite blue on a golden background. In the late 12th century, heraldry was just beginning to become a thing, and now was starting to be used by knights to show off their households. Wildly experimental and adventurous designs began propping up all over medieval England, until they began to become more standardized in the 13th and 14th centuries that followed. The spear or lance, which is just the old French name for a spear, was still the primary weapon used by a medieval knight during this period, as mounted combat was the preferred method for chevaliers during the 12th century. In England, the word lance began to become a more tailored item specifically for mounted combat beginning in around the 13th century and beyond, but for now, it's still very much just like a standard spear. At this point, I would like to thank the reenactor featured in today's video. I have put his social media pages in the video description, and I ask that you follow him to show support for the high quality reenactment that he provides. Supporting the reenactors featured in these videos helps show our respects to their efforts in recreating authentic historical portrayals, which in turn helps us understand how warriors of various historical periods looked and how they fought. Supporting the reenactors also helps me make more videos just like this, and feature new people on the channel who have highly authentic kit.